problem I was trying to address for my capstone project was the all-important student engagement. I had a very difficult time trying to keep and maintain student interest, motivation, and participation in one of my class periods specifically. I tried everything, from labs to group activities to strict individual assignments. Nothing seems to work, and I became exceedingly frustrated, as were the students. To make matters worse, in dealing with all the behavior issues that ensued from lack of interest, my other classes were falling by the wayside. I needed to find a solution to this huge problem, and what do you know? The EMDT program asked me to do just that. My capstone project gave me just the resources, innovation, and insight I needed to try to help my students and save my sanity. As a new teacher, your toolbox is somewhat scarce, and everything can be so overwhelming. This was the direction and support I needed. I began doing some research on student engagement with technology and uses of technology in the classroom. I found that so much of technology in education research was being done at the university level, with online learning platforms and distance education. I found very little about technology being used in the middle school level in terms of aiding in student engagement. That was it! I would try to use a learning management system to help better engage my students and allow for more ownership in my students' learning. If they have more variety, flexibility, and could dictate different aspects of their education, maybe I would get the student engagement I was looking for. It might also help move me back to the organization level I needed to be at in order to properly take care of those innocent bystanders I had let slip. Thanks to Dr. Gillette, I began researching various learning theories. I was trying to find one I felt fit with student engagement and the unique age group I was working with. When we then started delving into the inner workings of Jensen and his brain-based learning theory, I was hooked. It showed me how the brain worked and unique ways to trigger whole brain thinking. Maybe I could couple this with the technology and LMS ideas I had been inspired to use to help my students achieve meaningful learning. I could then show that online learning tools might be thought of when trying to engage the oh-so-challenging middle school group. I began by trying to find various technologies I would use to engage my students. I had already started using a wonderful site called Explore Learning with my students, but I needed more. Thanks to our Riles project in our ECT class, I became exposed to so many different new and emerging technologies from both my classmates and instructor. One technology in particular caught my attention, Schoology.com. I had been using Moodle with my school and I really wanted to find something better. One of our more vocal and entertaining classmates posted a Riles project on Schoology, and it quickly became extremely attractive to me. It seemed I could provide more resources to my students with this LMS and that it was extremely user-friendly. As my students described it, it was like Facebook for school. I could link the Explore Learning activities to our Schoology class using these tools hand in hand. The best part was I could monitor everything the students were doing, including the comments they were making to one another. Perfect moderation! So I had the technologies, the learning platform, and my learning theories. How will I assess engagement, effectiveness, and overall learning? Deep breath, then the plunge into education design and evaluation. Just the info I needed to plan exactly how to tackle my new hurdle. Pre- and post surveys seemed a great way to gauge current student engagement. It gave me a measure of engagement to be able to compare to the implementation of my ideas. The content pre- and post tests were already determined by the other 8th grade science teachers and I, so that would be simply transferred to Schoology, but I decided to create a project-based assessment as well. I wanted the students to be able to apply the skills they learned for Newton's laws of motion. Last year, one of my colleagues required his students to create skits, and I thought that would fit into this unique attempt at student engagement perfectly. I created a rubric posted to Schoology for the students to utilize in creation of their skit projects. Surprisingly, this was the part students enjoyed best because it allowed them so much creativity and freedom. At this time, I found that Schoology synced perfectly with Google Docs and decided to create all my tools using Google Docs in some way. I also began creating some vital resources to use in the unique mode of teaching Newton's laws I was looking for. After Cycle 1, my project took a slightly different turn. As I began music videos I wanted to use in Cycle 2, my class became beyond disinterested. See, we had just come back from spring break and prior to that finished our standardized testing. This was spring fever to the max. Not to mention, my class was required to move on to energy. What was I to do? Okay, deep breath. Roxanne to the rescue. I was told I could change my demographics and content for Cycle 2. Phew! I could then compare the results of both situations to see how effective this was. I utilized the same technologies, same learning theory, same LMS. I used the same pre- and post-engagement surveys and pre- and post-energy tests, KWL charts, and project-based assessment. The only thing I changed was the project itself. I thought a more practical building activity would be more appropriate for learning types of energy. I maintained uniformity further by uploading all resources to Schoology and giving the students the freedom to complete the project as they saw fit. They were required to design an amusement park ride that showed varying degrees of different types of energy as well as amounts of each. They could draw, physically build, virtually design, as long as I had access to it. This was a project I expected the majority of the students to enjoy because it involved building and manipulating. In my results, however, more students not only turned in more skit projects in Cycle 1, but scored better overall than the students with the roller coasters in Cycle 2. Students had similar gains in the content learned, scoring about the same % proficient. But I really found interesting, though, were the surveys. Before each cycle, students found science fair and labs the most interesting part of science, if they found science interesting at all. After each cycle, interest went up to over 75% in both groups, with the specific content we learned or project completed being the most interesting part. So while content was learned and possibly not demonstrated as well in projects, interest in science improved, and that has huge possibility. Throughout this capstone process, I learned that the skit project may have been enjoyed better because it made the students uncomfortable. It created that perfect stress level Jensen 2008 talked about, in which the brain as a whole functions at a higher level, created more synapses and better connections to what was being absorbed. The project itself also provided more flexibility because it had a number of possible delivery methods, which made the grading more diverse and less narrow. The coaster project, though I thought would be just as diverse, turned out to be more concrete. It required certain calculations and guidelines I had not at the time seen to be confining. I think the students found it less creative and more tedious, turning them away from the appeal and excitement of the project. These are important aspects to consider for future project-based assessment. I am now teaching technology and STEM, in which all learning will be project-based. I need to ensure I allow the students plenty of freedom to be completely creative in order to ensure complete engagement if this group of students are similar to the ones I had. Students need to be challenged enough to create some stress so the brain may function at that higher level required to create those permanent synapses learning so desperately needs.
With all of these experiences in my now extensive toolshed, I believe I can now create an environment conducive to whole brain learning and engagement to hopefully prevent the repetition of Fall Nightmare 2012.